This is Varrock. It's one of the greatest human cities in all the world. It has a palace, a standing army, a bustling economy, and about 12 houses. Lumbridge is meant to be a productive farming town. It has a castle, it has a duke, it has a super secret racist cult, but we don't really talk about that. But somehow these 5 fields are supposed to feed like half the kingdom. So what's going on here? Why does every town in old school RuneScape feel so small? If we take the game map literally, none of these places make any sense. It's rare to find empty space between any of these regions, which you just don't get in real life. Real life has these vast areas of land with no useful resources, no helpful NPCs, just absolutely no reason at all to visit. But video games aren't meant to be like that. Cities that should house thousands look like model villages.
You want to be a big cop in a small town? Fuck off up the model village.
Journeys that should take days take 3 minutes of walking. The answer to all of this is something called scale theory. This feeling isn't unique to RuneScape. You probably felt it in other games, even if you've just never stopped to think about it. Take Pokemon for example. Pallet Town is meant to be this cute little quiet hometown, you know, where everyone knows each other. Yeah, of course everyone knows each other. There's like 2 houses in this entire town. One of the houses is your own and then the other is your best friend's. You live in your house with your mum. You've got a very sparse living room and just one single bedroom. Like, are we really supposed to believe this is an entire town? But I mean, Skyrim does the same thing. Whiterun seems impressive. It has walls and guards and districts and a ruling jarl. But once you start to look at the details, you can walk from one gate to the other in like under a minute. You can count the houses, which you wouldn't be able to do in a normal major city. All of a sudden, the capital of this entire province starts feeling suspiciously small. Eni Austin encountered a very similar problem in one of his latest videos, where he found the density of trees in Skyrim was only around 1/5 of what it would be in a similarly wooded environment in real life. Well, RuneScape's scale works in the exact same way. Jimmy also encountered a very similar point in one of his latest videos, where he found the number of beds in Ardoin was approximately 1/10 of what it should be. Cities feel important because they're written and designed to be important, but they're physically tiny so the game stays playable. It's this compressed representation that we call scale theory. The world that we're shown is incomplete, but not in the missing content kind of way. You have the game's universe. It's theoretical, but it's everything that could exist within the rules of your game. And then you have this distance, a gap that we'll call X for now. Then you simply have the game's lore. This is different to the universe because it's actually documented, you know, it's confirmed by the creators. But then we have another gap, and we'll call this one Y for now. And then finally we have what you see in the world. This is the world as it's presented to us, the players of the game, but also how it's viewed through the lens of your character as you're playing. The X gap here is just the not yet written stories, the undesigned regions. It contains things like Pokemon Generation 10, or RuneScape's Eastern Lands, or Elder Scrolls 6. The Y gap is scale theory. It's how the lore is simmered and reduced down to what you see. I like to think of it like your game character has severe tunnel vision. They're just mega goal orientated and they're essentially ignoring the vast majority of the fluff in the world. I mean, Ash Ketchum is meant to be this 10-year-old boy. Like, of course you only know your bedroom and of course you only know your house. You know, Pallet Town starts to make a bit more sense when you view it through the eyes of this small boy. The RuneScape player character has the same kind of tunnel vision. The distances between cities are compressed because your character has no need to know what's in between them. Once you start looking for it, old school RuneScape is full of these quiet acknowledgements that the world that we see is only a partial representation of the whole. The clearest examples are the cities themselves. Ardoin, Falador, Varrock, they're not really meant to be these small settlements. In the RuneScape novels, each of them is described as a major population centre. This is one of the RuneScape novels, Betrayal at Falador. And while it isn't the game, lots of this book has been confirmed to be canon. In this book, Betrayal at Falador, Varrock is described as the greatest human city in all the world. Really? Like, you know, it's okay, but it's supposed to house thousands of people and we just don't see that level of density. These cities contain far more NPCs than they have visible housing for. There's guards, workers, shopkeepers, officials, roles that imply a much larger civilian population than the buildings here could ever support. Some content makes this missing world even more explicit. Temple trekking is a minigame that takes the players through Mort Maya in Mauritania. Except the places that you visit in this minigame don't exist in the world map at all. The journey winds through swampland and ruined paths and hostile terrain with multiple routes and encounters that suggest a far broader region than the narrow slice of land that we usually interact with in Mort Maya. The µʻthēlin Mystery Quest does a similar thing on a smaller scale. µʻthēlin Manor is described as being on an island just south of Lumbridge Swamp, but if you look, no island exists there. Even now with the sailing expansion and there's tons of new islands to explore, µʻthēlin Manor doesn't show up at all. Its location only exists in the story and not the permanent geography of the game. Another interesting example comes from the balloon transport system. If the player fails to unlock a new balloon route during or after the Enlightened Journey quest, the balloon crashes down at one of 2 designated crash sites. I actually couldn't find you any footage here for these crash sites because to crash in these minigames you have to be such a huge noob that there's just no found foot. Sorry, I'm just getting a call. Hello? Oh, what's that? Oh, really? Yeah, well, somehow that's not surprising. Okay, thank you very much. Bye. Yeah, here's a clip from alienfood encountering that crash site. These areas are deliberately unremarkable. Small, barren clearings with no unique landmarks, no clear sense of where they sit in relation to anything else. They're not meant to be these specific places, more of a you're lost in the woods kind of vibe. When taken together though, these moments quietly reinforce the same idea. The world of RuneScape is much larger and messier than the discrete tile-based version that we move through. What we see is not everything that exists, it's just what the game wants us to see. Over the years there's been a lot of attempts to answer a very specific question. How big is the world of Gielinor really? And players have approached this from probably every angle you could ever think of. Some have tried to measure character height against door frames using the player model as a reference point. Others have assumed that each tile represents a fixed real-world distance, often treating tiles like meters and just building maps outward from there. There's even been attempts to reverse engineer scale from the Java game engine itself, treating the world like it's some technical artifact that can be decoded. ModMattK suggested in a livestream that a single tile is roughly 4 feet across, which gives the world a measurable size on paper, but still leaves a lot of unanswered questions. Looking back again to the betrayal at Falador, travel times in this book are completely different to how they are in game. The journey from Falador to the foothills of Ice Mountain is described as taking 3 days. Going back to the quote about Varrock from earlier, the barbarians were forbidden by treaty to hunt on the eastern bank, for that belonged to the hunters of Varrock, the greatest human city in the world, 2 days travel away. Edgeville Monastery is meant to be a few days north of Barbarian Village. At one point the characters are on the way to the monastery from Barbarian Village and they stop after 20 miles. One character claims that you can no longer see Falador from this point. It's right there, dude. Later, after a fight at the monastery, apparently Edgeville is a full day's journey to the east. But it's not just the space in between cities that's warped here. The dens are described quite a lot in this book as a place in South Falador, kind of run down. It's described as a warren of old buildings. It also says every street looked the same in the dark. Like, yeah, of course it did, dude. There's one street down here. None of these descriptions line up cleanly with the playable map, and that's kind of my point. Every attempt to calculate the exact size of Gielinor just runs into the same problem. It just doesn't make any sense to map the in-game tiles to this real-world perspective. The world is simply just not built to be measured that way. You know, kind of like how all of Whoville is supposedly on a speck of dust or a snowflake, you know? You can't be sure with these fantasy worlds. We talked a lot here now about the size of things from a space point of view, but there's also a lot of weird stuff going on with time. It takes 1.2 seconds for your character to string a short bow. It also takes like 3 seconds for your character to construct an entire larder with shelves and all sorts. I don't know, man. Connecting 2 ends of a piece of wood with some string doesn't seem like it'd take only half the amount of time to make an entire pantry. What we can simply see here is that time is scaled too. Jimmy talked in his video about the idea of unpausing the world and wanting to see how things would play out, but even the idea of unpausing is weird. Gielinor isn't completely static. There is the completely immobile scenery objects like this rock. You can't interact with it, it doesn't move, it doesn't speak, it doesn't change. This is Gielinor paused. But then there's static NPCs like the bankers, for example. At first glance, you might just want to lump them in with the rock, but if you take a closer look, they are animating in place. They're stuck in a time loop only a few seconds long. Another level up from these time loops is we have the Wanderers, the NPCs that are free to roam within 5 tiles or so. I see these as more like chaotic time loops. Eventually the NPC will come back to their starting position, but they're just free to take any path they choose to get there. On a similar level but with less chaos, we have NPCs that are caught in a tight, controlled loop. This workman carries archaeological finds from the dig site to the museum constantly. I got a little bit curious watching him, so I timed his route. It takes him 3 minutes to complete it. If we assume he's been doing this non-stop on a loop since May 29th, 2007 when he came into existence, he's completed 3,261,599 laps. The poor guy doesn't even know he's stuck in a time loop. Or does he? Does he? Whew, that's weird. And last we have an even bigger, even weirder time loop. This battle between the gnomes and the Khazad warriors has been raging since 2002. Initially I thought it'd be cool to estimate the kind of deaths that have happened in this region, but I don't know, it seems a little bit macabre, a little bit too real for this video kind of thing. I'm lying. 148 million gnomes have died in this place since 2002. Will there be no end to the bloodshed? So once you accept that the world that we play in is scaled in the way it is, the next question is quite simple really. Why? And there's a few answers, but just to begin with, games are hard to make. Old school RuneScape is an old game now, It started life as a Java applet browser game, built at a time when memory was tight, processing power was limited, and the entire thing had to run on machines that was already struggling to run the browser itself. Every extra tile mattered, every extra object mattered. Free space wasn't free. On top of that, Jagex wasn't the large studio that it is today. Early RuneScape was made by a small team of people working together to build something that people could actually play. A larger, more realistic world doesn't just take more time to design, it also takes more time to test, to build and deploy. And then there's the running the live server side of things. As much as it can feel like it at times, RuneScape isn't a single player game. Bigger maps can mean moving more data around, more entities that need to be tracked, more pathing calculations, more processing, even when nothing is happening. You know that old saying, if a tree falls in a forest and no one is around to hear it, does the server still have to update the game state to show the tree stump model and spawn in a fallen tree and have wandering NPCs update their pathing to move around the fallen tree and start monitoring a timer for when the tree respawns? That old chestnut? Emptier spaces also introduce another problem. A world that's larger needs more people in it to feel the same level as alive. More players on one server simply means more load and more complexity. And in turn, more load means more instability. So the world was built dense. It's easier to run, it's easier to populate, and it's easier to keep online. The technical reasons explain why this world exists at all, but it doesn't explain why it feels quite so good to play in. A one-to-one version of RuneScape would be exhausting, and not in a dramatic kind of way, just a quiet, draining kind of, I don't want to log in anymore kind of way. If traveling between towns took 3 days of uninterrupted walking, most players would not experience that as immersion. They just experience it as friction. Time matters in games, and especially like a game like old school RuneScape, which already demands thousands of hours from you. Long stretches of movement with nothing to interact with, they don't feel meaningful, they just feel like waiting. Empty space can work in games that are designed around atmosphere and exploration. But RuneScape is built around accumulation. Accumulating resources, accumulating encounters, accumulating progress. And small moments of discovery are what keep the game flowing. A more realistic world would space these things out. Resources would be rarer. Unique NPCs would be few and far between. And while that kind of realism does sound appealing in theory, in practice it just tends to flatten the experience. Most land would purely exist to be crossed. What RuneScape does instead is respects the player's time, which I know, sounds kind of crazy from a game that on the macro scale demands hundreds or thousands of hours to get that one drop, but trust me, on the micro scale it's different. RuneScape places things together so that movement nearly always feels purposeful. Like good pathing and good routing are like core pillars of this game. I say movement nearly always feels purposeful because it's the times when it doesn't quite work that the game feels off. On the small scale is when the forestry struggling sapling requires a huge lap around the fence. On the large scale is when new regions don't quite keep up with the scaling of older content. This gives you Zaya and the Kingdom of Great Krend. When Zaya was released, 10 years ago by the way, you're fucking old, it was massive and a huge mess. Everything was all spread out and it just didn't fit in with the original continent. So yeah, you're rarely walking without reason, and you're rarely far from something that matters. Keeps the world around you readable, but most importantly, it keeps it learnable too. And that sense of familiarity is not an accident. How many real life cities do you know like the back of your hand? But you probably know exactly where the rune shop is in Varrock or where the gym is in Pewter City. Knowing where you are and what's nearby and how long something's going to take are all parts of making a game feel comfortable to come back to. Too much realism takes that all away, replaces it with distance and scarcity and silence. At the end of the day, all of this comes down to game design. Every world is shaped by the experience that its creators want you to experience. Empty space is not automatically a flaw. In some games it is the point. Large, quiet stretches of nothing can be used as settings themselves. Space games do this constantly, where distance creates scale and isolation. The same is true for games built almost entirely around movement. Walking simulators can turn long, uneventful journeys into the core experience. For those games, a 40-minute walk isn't wasted time, it is the game. RuneScape is not built that way. Its design is about momentum. It's about chaining small goals together and always having something just within reach. And none of that is accidental, it's just a set of choices that are made to make a very specific game. Some games should have vast distances and extensive travel, others go for familiarity and efficiency and rhythm. This game just chooses the latter. And once you start noticing the patterns, RuneScape doesn't feel so small anymore. Cool, that's the end of the video. Maybe a little bit of a different one from me, but hope you enjoyed it all the same. I have recently started designing my own merch at ßᵐᵃ.com. If you feel like supporting me in some way, go to ßᵐᵃ.com and have a little browse. Admittedly, there isn't a ton on there at the moment, but I'm going to keep, practicing and getting better at designs and, have a little look if you fancy it. Oh, I've also decided this video is going to have bloopers in it. And that's just a theory. Oh, did you hear my wrist then? Jesus Christ. Our very own Jimmy encountered the same problem in his latest. Our very own Jimmy encountered a very similar problem in one of Jimmy, Jimmy, fuck me. Jimmy, once you start looking for it, old school RuneScape is full of these quiet acknowledgements that the world that we see is only a partial representation of the whole. Whose whole? I guess we'll never know. Please don't keep that in.